HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Complicated Passion, The Life and Work of Agnès Varda, by Carrie Rickey, read by Christina Delaine. Talent is insignificant. Beyond talent lie all the usual words: discipline, love, luck, but most of all, endurance. James Baldwin. Introduction. Agnès Varda moved me to tears even before I'd seen one of her films. It was 1971. I was an undergraduate at the University of California, San Diego, and the class was A Hard Look at the Movies, an eclectic film survey taught by the painter and film critic Manny Farber. Then new to teaching, Farber had no syllabus. Most weeks he'd just start a movie, turn down the sound, and drew our attention to how framing shaped the narrative. Sometimes he had the projectionist run the movie backward. Farber showed us 1950s film noirs like Sam Fuller's Pickup on South Street, 1960s experimental films like Michael Snow's Wavelength, and elliptical narratives lately shown at the New York Film Festival, like Robert Bresson's Mouchette. The week he showed Agnès Varda's Cléo from 5 to 7, 1961, he prefaced it by telling us that the director, whom I misunderstood as Agnes Varda, was a still photographer who had become a filmmaker. When the movie began and I saw script and direction by Agnès Varda on the screen, tears spritzed from my eyes. Who knew there was such a thing as a female filmmaker? I was not yet aware that women directors had been there since the creation of film. Many credit French filmmaker Alice Guy Blaché with making the first movie feature, The Cabbage Fairy, in 1896, although inexplicably she was largely absent from film history for the better part of a century. Soon I would become aware that feminist scholars had commenced the ongoing project of restoring to history female filmmakers such as Guy Blaché, Lois Weber, Dorothy Arzner, Ida Lupino, and hundreds more who had been erased from it. But Varda was my first, and Cléo? I had never seen anything like it. During this 90-minute film that creates the illusion it is happening in real time, a fetching blonde pop singer accustomed to being gaped at awaits the results of a biopsy. As she waits, she has a revelation. Varda put it best in a 1975 essay. Cléo is the cliché woman. Tall, beautiful, blonde, voluptuous. The whole dynamic of the film lies in showing the woman at the moment she doesn't want to be this cliché, the moment she doesn't want to be looked at, when she wants to do the looking herself. From the object of the look, she becomes the subject who looks. Even at 18, I recognized that Varda had crystallized a profound instant of personal transformation and intellectual growth. From her directorial debut La Pointe Courte, 1954, to her posthumously released Memoir, Varda by Agnès, 2019, almost all of Agnès Varda's films capture such a decisive moment in film imagery in a language all her own. She called it cinécriture, or film writing, bridging documentary and feature filmmaking, and revolutionizing both. Over more than 60 years, and through more than 44 shorts and feature-length films, Varda showed that a powerful, memorable film could run 2 minutes or 2 hours, depending on what it had to say. She demonstrated that documentary and fiction were not opposites, and that they could, in fact, coexist. She changed the way that movies looked by becoming an early adapter of digital technology, and by putting women at the center of her movies, she helped expand the way filmgoers looked at men and women, at social arrangements, and the world. As Martin Scorsese put it, Varda really opened the way for filmmakers to question all the inhibitions they inherited and all the expectations. And yet for decades, Varda was underappreciated, if not unsung. And yet for decades, Varda was underappreciated, if not unsung. A pioneer of the French New Wave, She saw her trailblazing and probing early works, 2 features and 5 shorts between 1954 and 1961, eclipsed by what French journalist Michel Captenac characterized as a group of hot-headed noisy auteurs, referring to François Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Alain Resnais, Jacques Demy, and their New Wave confrères, some of whom became Varda's closest friends, and one of whom, Demy, became her husband. In a conversation we had in Cannes in 1988, Varda described their marriage as a complicated passion. The phrase equally applies, I think, to her life as a filmmaker. Over the years, scholars and critics on this side of the Atlantic, including Kelly Conway, Manolo Dargis, Rebecca J. DeRue, Sandy Flitterman Lewis, Molly Haskell, Nam Lee, B. Ruby Rich, and Amy Talbin, among others, have championed her work. And with the release of The Gleaners and I, 2000, her acclaimed film about the waste engendered by industrial farming, she gained a new following. Like so many of her films, this visual essay on the history and ecology of finding sustenance in what others reject was ahead of its time, priming audience awareness of income inequality and the waste not, want not zeitgeist to come. So was the fact that Varda shot it cheaply on a small, lightweight digital camera at a time when many of her peers were wringing their hands over the end of cinema made on costly film. Suddenly, the marginalized woman in the fraternity of French filmmakers became a global icon for the Green Movement and a recognized advocate for recycling. Varda's elevated profile was in no small part a product of feminist scholarship, comparable to the rediscovery of Mexican surrealist Frida Kahlo by art historian Hayden Herrera, of writer Zora Neale Hurston by author Alice Walker, of Danish storyteller Isaac Dinesen by Judith Thurman, and of pioneer French filmmaker Alice Guy Blaché by film and art historian Joan Simon. Still, despite all the acclaim, Varda remains better known in her parts than in her whole. To film historians, she is the catalyst of the French New Wave. To feminists, she is the woman who led a 2018 march at the Cannes Film Festival, with Cate Blanchett, Ava DuVernay, Patty Jenkins, Celine Sciamma, Salma Hayek, Léa Seydoux, Kristen Stewart, and other leading actresses and filmmakers, to call attention to how few female directors had ever been invited to Cannes' main competition. To those of my daughter's generation, she is the quirky grandma of documentaries like Faces, Places, 2017. Even those who love Varda's films are often unfamiliar with the masterful photographs she shot in the 1950s, and outside of art museums, few know of her late career work as an installation artist. And this is not even to mention the Zelig-like improbability of a woman who was chums with Susan Sontag, a political ally of Simone de Beauvoir, the discoverer of Gérard Depardieu, the director of an early Harrison Ford screen test, and a friend of Jim Morrison who kept his death under wraps for several days. People often speak of how Agnès broke new ground for women filmmakers, and she has, said Angelina Jolie when she presented Varda with an honorary Oscar in 2017. But to discuss it that way is to limit her contribution. She broke new ground as an artist, period. In 2019, Varda succumbed to breast cancer, the diagnosis feared by the heroine of Cléo from 5 to 7. When not being fated or receiving chemotherapy treatments, Varda worked shoulder to shoulder with her daughter, Rosalie Varda, to complete Varda by Agnès. During her final months, she was more loved, well-known, and celebrated than ever before, said her close friend and collaborator Jane Birkin, the singer, actress, and screenwriter. Upon Varda's death, renowned figures from French President Emmanuel Macron to pop star Madonna celebrated Varda's films, her art, and her wit. So did the residents of Montparnasse, the Paris neighborhood where she lived for decades. As an Irish Times journalist who eulogized Varda put it, her family and fans can draw consolation from the awareness that she died while part of the cultural conversation. From my first encounter with Cléo to my last with Varda 4 decades later, the director and her work expanded my received ideas of who a filmmaker is and what a film can be. When she died in 2019, she had directed for 65 years, the longest of any female filmmaker. I was curious about the internal and external forces that shaped her, how she seemed to dodge the potholes that beset so many indie and female directors and artists, and how, when she lacked the resources to make a feature, she created shorts and installation art. As an artist, she evolved from still pictures to moving pictures to three-dimensional multimedia art. The end products were, like her, boundary blurring, erasing distinctions between documentary and fiction, film and sculpture, art and theater. Though I'd seen, re-seen, thought about, lectured on, and written about her work, I knew precious little about how Brussels-born Arlette Varda, from the neighborhood of Ixelles, where Audrey Hepburn was born a year later, became Agnès Varda. And I knew that a director's filmography is not a biography. I wanted to understand Varda not as a timeline, but in 360 degrees. I wanted to know how her studies in philosophy at the Sorbonne and art history at the École du Louvre led to her studies of photography at the École Technique de Photographie et de Cinématographie and her first career as a still photographer. I also wanted to know how an image maker who had seen fewer than 10 films in her life went from making pictures that stood still to those that moved. I wanted better to know this woman who was an artist, a filmmaker, the first chime in the carillon that became the new wave, as a contemporaneous critic put it, a single mother, then wife and mother, political activist, widow, grandmother, and late-life fairy godmother of independent film. Undertaking such a project, I hope, is a contribution to keeping her work and her memory alive. Part 1. Still. 1. They had named her Arlette, her parents told her, because she was conceived in Arles, France, during the waning days of August 1927. Originally a Phoenician trading port that evolved into a geographically strategic city on the western edge of the Roman Empire, Arles is a vest-pocket Rome on the Rhone, a city of antiquity overlooking the mouth of a great river that threads northeast past vineyards and farms all the way to Switzerland. Arles' ancient amphitheaters, its aqueducts, and its necropolis, the Allescamp, still stand, just a short hop from the Mediterranean. This city, where Van Gogh once painted, may have particularly appealed to Varda's father, Eugène Varda, an ethnic Greek born in 1890 in Smyrna, now Izmir, Turkey. Eugène had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Their father was a medical doctor who had studied in France and was a member of the Greek diaspora's haute bourgeoisie. Following Eugène's education at Catholic French language schools in Smyrna, he traveled to Montpellier, France, to see his brother. In 1910, he enrolled at the University of Liège in Belgium to study engineering, receiving his diploma in 1914. Shortly after, World War I commenced. According to his son, Eugène marched with the Belgian army from Liège to Brussels, hoping to enlist. Rejected, he walked across the French border to Rennes and finally to Brest, where he enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. At Verdun in 1916, a fragment from a grenade lodged in his gut. Subsequent surgery left him with 10 fewer inches of intestine and a belt-like scar around his midsection. His service qualified Eugène to apply for French citizenship, and he became a naturalized citizen in 1919. By that time, he had served first as an engineer in the design department, and then as the manager of the manufacturing division of the Industrial Company of Armaments in Saint-Étienne, a town in southeast France close to the Swiss border. In May 1919, Eugène wed Antoinette Mercier, daughter of an officer friend from the Foreign Legion. It was a brief union. 13 months later, they were divorced. By the time the divorce decree came through, Eugène likely had already met Christian Pasquet, a striking blonde with chocolate brown eyes. Born in 1898, she was the sixth of 12 children of Édouard Pasquet, a Protestant pastor in a French town nestled in the Jura near the Swiss border, and his Marseille-born wife, Hélène, née Fraissinet, whose family owned a prominent shipping line. According to her son, Christiane's grandparents were prosperous, but her father, Édouard, was poor as a potter. In 1920, when Eugène was 30 and Christiane 22, they met in the nearby Swiss town of Les Brenets, near the waterfall Saut-des-Doux. Christiane wasn't there for the scenery. As an adult, Varda recounted the story that Christiane was sent by her father to raise money for a Protestant mission to Africa. Her brother Jean was told that the couple met in front of Le Croix Bleu, an international temperance society that rehabilitated alcoholics. Eugène soon asked Pastor Pasquet for his permission to marry Christiane, but the pastor was skeptical of a free thinker as a son-in-law. It took Eugène 18 months to persuade Pastor Pasquet to give in. Eugène Varda and Christiane Pasquet wed on December 20th, 1921, in Christiane's hometown of Ferney-Voltaire. The Vardas moved to Paris, where their firstborn, Hélène, was delivered, and then to Ixelles, a Brussels neighborhood, where their son Lucien was born. Varda was born on May 30th, 1928, the third of 5 children, the only one with an artistic bent. She thought of herself as a fifth wheel, the singleton stuck in the middle between the elder pair of siblings, Hélène and Lucien, and the younger pair, Jean and Sylvie. Varda described herself as the youngest of the older two and oldest of the younger two. In her 1994 memoir, Varda wondered playfully, "Did Mom, by naming me Arlette, always remember a city she loved, or this conception, of which my father was the director?" What Varda did have was a mother who nurtured her creativity. She wrote of her parents that they projected on their child to come the desire to be an artist. Christiane, known to her children as Cricri, read to me the lives of painters, and also the series Jean Christophe by Romain Rolland. The latter is a 10-volume saga about the inner life of a Beethoven-like composer. That anecdote, and another about how Christiane pawned Eugène's keychain and their wedding silver because they were short on money, are among the stories she later shared with Varda about her prenatal life. The money issues were resolved before Varda was born. Eugène asked Christiane to consent to his acquisition of an engineering concern, Antwerp Titan. According to a member of the family, "Christiane told me that when Jean's father took over this company, it was risky, despite everything, and she was pregnant with Arlette. But she told him, 'Don't worry, it will be fine.'" When Arlette was born, Ixelles was an attractive, leafy neighborhood of Brussels. They lived at 38 Avenue de la Croix in a courtyard apartment. Christiane's father-in-law wrote to her from Athens in July, relieved that Arlette's was not a breech delivery like that of her older brother Lucien. "My beloved daughter Christiane, I read with great pleasure your letter and the details of your happy childbirth. All's well that ends well. The name is charming, Arlette from the Greek Arleti, named by Greek geographer Strabo. My good son did not write to me, probably because of his work. According to what he wrote to me recently, he has an overload." The streets of Ixelles were studded with elegant Belle Époque architectural gems, many of them designed by Victor Horta, father of Art Nouveau. Varda was born 11 months before and about a mile from the birthplace of Etta Rustin, better known as Audrey Hepburn. It is tempting to imagine the infants, both doe-eyed brunettes, peering at each other from their prams as they passed from opposite directions on Avenue Louise, the neighborhood's main thoroughfare. "Of my birth and my little entrance, I am only the story of others," Varda said in her memoir Varda by Agnès, 1994. Both in her memoir and in her autobiographical documentary The Beaches of Agnès, 2008, there is scant mention of her siblings and only a little more of her father. Her memories of Cricri, though fleeting, are tender and tactile. She remembered that her mother made her memorize their address in Excel in the event that her adventurous daughter got lost. Likewise, she remembered that Cricri waved off others who coddled her, telling them, "She's old enough to tie her own laces." But as an adult, Varda couldn't conjure a picture of the avenue or the house or the habitat. Examining a photo of herself at 6 with a cabbage of ribbon atop her bob triggers memories of a comb parting her locks, and the sliding sound of the ribbon, and the feeling of hands drawing arabesques to attach a barrette. Like her future films and writing, her memories engage all the senses. She remembers neither appreciating nor challenging her hairstyle. Except for an androgynous period during her early 20s, she sported a version of that bob for her entire life. The bangs defined a sharp line across her hexagonal face, dramatizing eyes and cheekbones. "The North Sea and its sand are the start for me," she announces at the beginning of The Beaches of Agnès, seeming to suggest that, like Botticelli's Venus, she emerged from the ocean. For this lifelong explorer, the beach was primal, primeval, and elemental, a spiritual birthplace and recurring motif in her movies and art. In another family photo, there is Varda, hair topped by a brioche-scaled bow, front and center in a 1934 family snapshot on the beach at Ostende. Fists balled, she is 6 years old in this beach revel, running toward the camera with a mischievous grin. She looks as though she's both spoiling for a fight and about to win a race. Elder siblings Hélène and Lucien trail her on their bicycles, while younger brother Jean dances on the sand nearby. Summer holidays inevitably involve the beach. "When we were little," she remembered, "we were taken to Knokke-les-Zoute or to Ostende on the North Sea." Beach air and exercise was good for the bones, declared Cricri, who feared for her children the osteoporosis that had hastened her own father's premature death. These beaches on Belgium's 40-mile coast had diversions for Eugène as well. An inveterate gambler, he was drawn to the gaming tables at the casinos dotting the strand. While Eugène was at the roulette wheel, his children sold their handmade paper flowers on the beach, bartering blooms for seashells. The activity introduced Varda to the making and marketing of her own creations and may have helped to spark her lifelong preferences for the artisanal over the mass-produced object. Growing up in Brussels, Varda spoke French and some Flemish. In school, she studied German. As an adult, she learned Italian, some Spanish, and English. She was a lifelong lover of puns and an avid coiner of double entendres. The granddaughter of a Protestant pastor, the adult Agnès didn't remember any formal religious training, although her brother Jean did. "My mother was a pagan," said Jean Varda, admitting that Christian instilled in us a few notions. Varda's daughter, Rosalie, remembers her mother telling her that to piss off her authoritarian and atheist father, the young Arlette received confirmation. While the adult Varda maintained that she did not feel a strong link to her childhood, in her memoir she spoke with great warmth of the family's hand-cranked phonograph on which her mother, despite difficulty hearing, listened to Schubert's unfinished symphony. Christian hired au pairs from Germany to help in the house. One of them frequently played a recording of Schubert's Erlkönig on the family Victrola. Inspired by a Goethe poem about how the king of the elves spirits away a boy as he and his father gallop on horseback into the roaring wind of the Black Forest, Erlkönig haunted young Varda. She imagined that the tale of abduction and death took place at the edge of the nearby Ixelles ponds, through which she walked almost daily with Christian on their way to the vegetable market. The legend left a lasting impression on her. For one of a tender age, the abundance of linden, maple, and tulip trees, and the 2 freshwater pools in the Ixelles ponds resembled a fairy tale forest. Varda would walk through this swath of green, her left hand clutching Christian's, while her right stroked cast-iron barriers, of which I have a very precise memory. She loved the spectacle of pretentious swans with their fun-shaped tails, and seeing the ducks perching on the edges of their little hats. There were 2 small basins, petite versions of the Ixelles ponds, in the narrow but long garden at Avenue de la Couronne, where she and her siblings made paper boats and sailed them. Christiane, a self-taught student of art history, had a special affection for images of the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel informing the Virgin Mary of the imminent Immaculate Conception. One such painting was likely Arlette's earliest experience of visual storytelling. Mozart took us to Gand to see and re-examine the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, that large polyptych by Huber and Jan van Eyck, poorly lit at the bottom of alveolus in a cathedral choir, she remembered. For us children, it was a big puzzle of sketches, and we giggled when we saw again in the upper right and upper left a naked man and a naked woman, Adam and Eve, who hid their privates with their hands. That Varda rarely spoke of her father's influence might be because she was unconscious of how his life's work, tooling devices to operate more efficiently, may have inspired her own mechanical skills. Eugène used cranes and tracks as components of lading and unlading devices. Years later, Agnès Varda used them on movie sets to take a crane shot, a perspective from above, or a tracking shot, where the camera cuts through space like a moving train. Varda was 9 or 10 when she saw her first film. Christiane took her to the Cinéma Métropole, Brussels' Art Deco movie palace, to see Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1938. It was one of the few films she saw before making one. Though she loved fairy tales and myths, and though Christiane was enchanted and bought small felt replicas of the dwarves for her children, Varda had little use for the Disney version. "What is certain is that I hated Snow White," Varda remembered 60 years later. "I found her ugly and silly. I was like, why does she take care of these little ones all the time? Why is she doing all this? And when I saw Prince Charming, I found him hideous, ridiculous, soft, and insipid. And then I was very afraid of the witch, excruciating and cruel." Later, Varda would tell critic Amy Taubin that what she remembered disliking about the movie was its valorization of the heroine for cleaning the house of the dwarves without pay, a sophisticated critique for a 10-year-old. Germany's airborne attack on Belgium and the Netherlands began around dawn on May 10, 1940, coordinated with its army's motorized assault. Western Europe had lived in dread of German aggression since the prior September, when Hitler's army had invaded and partitioned Poland. That morning, Eugène and Christiane scooped their 5 children into their lapis blue 7-seat Packard to flee to France, correctly reckoning that Belgium would fall to the Nazis. What they didn't foresee was that 3 days later, German panzer divisions would thunder into France, ultimately occupying the country's northern half, including Paris. Varda and her family were fortunate to have a car, as many who left on foot or bicycle sustained wounds or died from German bombs. Eugène was prepared to abandon his engineering concern, which during the 1930s had helped remediate the damage to the port of Antwerp, one of Europe's largest from World War I. The Vardas were 7 among the 2 million Belgians, fully 20% of the nation's population, to seek refuge in France. Hélène, the eldest of the Varda children, was 17. Sylvie, the youngest, was 4. The bombs began raining down 3 weeks before Varda's 12th birthday. In the disruption and chaos, as Christiane hurriedly packed and Eugène loaded the car, Arlette had scant awareness of the imminent danger. "I was even happy to leave," she remembered years later. She recalled seeing one of her parents lock the door at Avenue de la Couronne and thinking, "Probably I will never see this place again." While the valises Christiane packed had a minimum of effects for each child, there was also a box with enough notebooks and pencils to equip a primary school, but almost nothing we needed, remembered her daughter. Setting out before settling on a destination, the Vardas were in transit for at least 6 weeks, perhaps longer.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?